Hey there, everybody. We're looking at one of our last online lectures. I know it's pretty sad for you, but if at some point it loads, then we'll all be happy campers. Okay, we're going to talk about, we've talked about primary industry. We talked about primary sector jobs. We've talked about secondary sector jobs like industry. And now we're going to talk about the tertiary jobs. And those are services. Services are any activity or job that provides a service or a want or need for money. It's basically all the things that help people but don't create something. By the way, you should be taking these notes on the back of that paper that you grabbed on Friday. If you didn't grab it, you're gonna want to copy it out or at least print it out because you'll see there's a bunch of weird diagrams, really difficult stuff today without it. So we're looking at tertiary services today. And you should notice a trend is that when we talk about services as opposed to things that sustain life, you're going to see a lot more of those services in MDCs. There are a couple exceptions here. Panama, right? Probably something to do with the Panama Canal and the amount of people who go through there. But what you should know about the United States, and don't worry about writing down these numbers, just know that over here you should see that all of these things are growing. There's 44% of the United States jobs are consumer services, meaning things that deal with people, education, retail, healthcare, entertainment, all of that stuff. In the business side, it's 24% of all U.S. jobs. Those are things like financial services, lawyers, information, etc. And then finally, there's public services, things like anyone who works in the government, with the exception of your teachers, DMV people. And those things have changed. Not only have they changed because we've privatized a lot of the stuff that the government used to do. Well, that's the reason. That's why they've changed. So even though this growth of service sector is growing, things are changing even in our United States. So where did services start? These are, remember, things that are to help people's lives be better. And they started with early rural settlements. People clustered. Oh, hold on. People clustered so that they could have access to similar services, and those services tend to end up going to where people are. So when a family or group got together and created a little hamlet or village, the services would head there, and then from that point, that city would grow out. The first one, and you're going to need to know this, for some reason the AP board really enjoys this term, they're called French long lot clustered systems. If you look here, this is a map and overhead shot of what these French lands look like, and you can see that they're clustered around two services. One is the river. See, they're long so that everyone has access to the river. And then they're also clustered around this mill, so they all have access to this mill via this little tiny road thing here. So they are a weird shape, but that weird shape allows them to all have access to a shared resource. And a shared resource is one thing that causes service clustering. There's a real life example of this picture. French long lot clustered settlements. In the United States, ours look a little different. In New England, if you look at the eastern part of the United States, the cities are shaped a little differently. And that's because of what was important to them at the time. Surrounding these areas are generally shining something called a village green. If you look at it here in the middle, and the village green is sort of a public space. There used to be animals there, stocks for if you did bad things. But mostly it was churches, schools, town halls, and people clustered their cities around common areas. So ours kind of have this rounder shape, so everyone could be close to the same area, whereas the French farms have this longer linear shape. We originally broke up these areas, by the way, something called meets and bounds, which was a survey system to put a region or cluster together that used natural boundaries. You definitely need to know that, so make sure you write it down. But now, as we headed west and we started expanding at such a huge rate, we couldn't do that as effectively anymore. Remember, it was the 18th century. Is it centuries or one after or before, right? I don't know, whatever. So you'll notice as we head west that everything is cubic. It's in rectangular and meridians and parallels, and it has knocked out cities in a square way. So that's why sometimes you'll see a road or something that doesn't make any sense because it like has to go over a river, and it's a different way of surveying land. Anyhow, but this all came from early cities. And back in the day, the earliest cities, remember, relied on those primary services like agriculture. But the primary service in cities was burying the dead. There were also religious services that were offered, the making of stuff, right? So even though that's a secondary source, these are all the first reasons people clustered together, and specifically for military protection. So they could use common resources like walls and defense, and transportation services for food, like rivers. If you think of the old Tigris and Euphrates, there's famously clustered around a water pathway. We'll just skip through here. Skip. Well, actually, you do need to know, write in your notes, that the world is becoming more urban. Even in LDCs, we're urbanizing, and there's a lot of interesting reasons why that might be true. You could point to neocolonialism, you could point to just advancement in building techniques, but you should know that even LDCs are becoming more urban today. So that brings us to what we're even here to talk about. Hopefully you're taking notes on all this, and you're about to flip over and look at that really intimidating sheet of models, those hexagons. So the question is, where do consumer services actually go in a city? This is geography after all. So think to yourself, how far would you be willing to drive for a pizza? If it was 20 miles away, would you ever go to Pizza Hut? Probably not. So cities around the world are built in a very similar fashion so that services are equidistant from, or not equidistant, but are put in places where everybody is going to be willing to make their way to that service. And it changes based on what you're doing, right? Maybe you wouldn't drive 30 miles for a Pizza Hut, but you would drive 30 miles to go see an oncologist who has a really high success rate of treating cancer. So these services change depending on your distance from them. I'm sorry, the distance you're willing to travel on those services changes depending on the service. So it's going to get really complicated here. This is called central place theory. This guy's name's Walter Kristaller. He is sort of the Weber of services. And he says, if you take a look at your hexagon, that all of this starts with a central place. So let's imagine this red star is Sacramento. This big red area is Sacramento's basically influence, is how we're going to talk about it for now, until we get you the vocab. And people are willing to travel from Sacramento to Sacramento from this whole distance, maybe to go see a Kings game, right? However, he doesn't think that there are there's only one center. He knows that there are other tiny centers. You might realize that there's a subway in every one of these cities, like Roseville or Davis or Antelope even. So each of these smaller centers will be kind of hubs for distance as well, and their influence would be in the blue on the outside. So man, if you might be willing to travel this far to go to the services that a small center could give you. And so anyway, let's get into it. So this is going to be really complex. You're going to take notes however you can on this stuff. But you should just know that there's bigger cities have a larger influence, and the cities surrounding that have a smaller influence for the less desirable and unique things that only a larger city would have. Okay, let's move into it. I told you hinterland was going to be important, and here it is. You should know that it works sort of like a nodal region. A market works like a nodal region. Essentially, it's the area surrounding a service in which customers use that service. So if you look at the market area, it's essentially the hinterland of a store or service. So let's, as an example, use Walmart. Well, by the way, the reason we use hexagons is because the circles overlap and it looks really ugly. So don't get hung up on the hexagons. there's an area around Walmart. If you look at here, this is where the Walmart is. This market area is everywhere that people are willing to go to and buy things at that Walmart. So pretty simple concept. A market area is the distance around a Walmart or a store in which people are willing to travel to that store. If you get to the outside of it, they're going to go to a different Walmart or not use the service at all. Cool. We talked about hexagons already. The range of that market is the maximum distance someone will travel for a service. So take a look at this outside edge here, this leading edge. If you're on the other side of this, you're not going to go here. No one's going to drive the 45 minutes to go to a McDonald's. In fact, it's probably about 2 or 3 minutes to go to a McDonald's. People will travel to a different service or find a different service in that case. And it depends on the service. If this market were, an oncologist, this range would be huge. If it's McDonald's, it's going to be a lot smaller. We already did McDonald's. We already did Starbucks. So when you get to the range, it's the outside distance that people are willing to travel to go to. Would you travel 5 miles to go to McDonald's? No. Would you travel 5 miles to go to a specialty goods store? Probably. And then the threshold. Don't get these two confused. The threshold is the minimum amount of people needed to support the service. So if you look at these white dots, these are all people who are willing to use that service. And the threshold is the minimum number of people that are needed to support the service. So if you opened up a Dollar Tree store, you would have to have X amount of customers per day. So that amount of customers would need to be within the range. However, if the threshold is greater than the range, you're not going to be making any money, right? So you need more people than you have people within the range. So it's a really complicated way to say you just need enough customers to keep your business afloat. But we'll skip through here. I'm trying to keep this thing short. And this is sort of what it looks like. Basically a little tricky. The more stuff you have, the more people are willing to travel. Easy, 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 easy. Cool. So why do supermarkets have a larger range than small specific stores? Unless that store is the only thing that carries something, people are going to go to a supermarket because it carries more things. It has a larger reach. I'm not going to drive all the way to Inglewood from from Vendela, I can't see that far, just to get some milk. I'm going to go to a supermarket instead, right? Makes sense. So this is it. If you get the hexagons, you're a happy camper. All it is saying is that big centers have a big influence because they have specialty goods and specialty services. Smaller cities and towns have not an overlapping, but a shared boundary services. So depending on the thing, I'm not going to go to the Walmart down in Sacramento if I could go to the Walmart in Antelope. So this blue dot has its own influence. This red dot has its own influence, but it's bigger depending on what it is. Notice it also has a blue boundary. So if we're talking about blue boundary goods like Walmart, I'm not going to go all the way to the red dot to do that. So it's just a way of showing that different nodes have different reaches for different services. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. Oh, okay, and that's all we're doing today, I believe. Let me make sure. Oh, gravity model. Oh, that's so hard. Okay, I will see you guys on Monday. Hopefully you got this down on the graphic organizer. If this totally confused you, don't worry. Maybe Google it. See if there's a better video out there than this one I just made you.